Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome to the stream. I'm Ian Douglas. I'm a senior developer advocate at Postman, and today with me I got Sam from Microsoft hanging out, and we're gonna get nerdy today. I've been really excited for this stream for a little while. We're gonna have some fun. We were on a call, and I started kind of. I like to kind of peek at everybody's background, going, "What do you got on those bookshelves back there?" And I saw a bunch of like games and stuff. I'm like, "Oh, what do what kind of games are you into?" And turns out Sam's really into tabletop gaming, as am I. So we thought that'd be a fun idea for a stream today. So welcome to the stream, Sam. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you? Tell us about your background, what you do at Microsoft, and then we're gonna dive in and get nerdy today. So feel free to drop a hello in chat. Let us know where you're all from. Sam, introduce yourself. Tell us about Sam.
All right. Hello, everyone. I am Sam Wronski. I'm a regional advocate at Microsoft. So my job is to help mostly with people in the Bay Area, help run events, and also help people learn more about awesome things they can do with Microsoft technology. So hi, it's great to see you all. I've done a lot of different things over my career, everything from .NET, which we're going to be talking about today, to game development, to some infrastructure stuff and Kubernetes and cloud native stuff. So kind of bounced around a bit. So I'm really excited to share some of that.
Awesome. Well, that's great. Well, I've been at Postman for just over a year now. Actually, I had my 1 year anniversary recently, and been really excited to build different kinds of things. One thing that I've never actually gotten into is C# and .NET. I've used a lot of different programming languages over the years. I've dabbled in C#, but I've never actually built anything in .NET. So today, Sam's going to help me build an API in .NET, and then I'm going to teach Sam how to use Postman to test that API, and we'll get into building out some basic testing and setting up some expectations and assertions and things like that as we go. So hello to everybody in chat. And our theme for today. So since Sam and I are both into tabletop gaming, we thought we would get really nerdy today. So I pulled out my giant metal D20s just for the occasion, and I got my other bag of nerd dice here as well. And basically what we're going to build as our API is we're going to go call like a D&D API to basically look up some spell data. We're going to parse some of that data, and then we're going to do a dice roll for damage. We're going to build all that into our API, and then I'm going to show Sam, okay, this is how we're going to pull that API into .NET now and actually test it. So Sam's already written the code, but Sam's basically going to coach me through this as we go. And so we'll dive in on that in just a minute. But we like to start all of our live streams with a segment called In Case You Missed It. And so I'm going to drop a handful of links in chat here in just a moment. Let me switch my share screen, and we will go over to, where'd my other window go? This window. So this is the API that we're going to be showing everybody. But let's talk a little bit about some release notes. So we had some new releases come out recently. Last week on the stream, Joyce and Pooja had a guest on the stream, and they talked a little bit about some of the upcoming changes and a VS Code plugin that we're going to be releasing later in the year. But we've had a couple of bug fixes and so on in the application, so you can always go find that on our release notes page. And then we had a guest blog post as well, written by Nohe, that was basically talking about converting a GraphQL schema into a Postman collection. So they've actually got a tool where you can take a GraphQL schema, and it'll go through and it'll parse all of that and build that into a Postman collection for you. It'll speed up your Postman development as well a little bit quicker if you are using GraphQL. We've also got a ton of really cool GraphQL changes coming out. We're going to be having a number of live streams about that pretty soon, and possibly an intergalactic session as well, all centered around the GraphQL and GraphQL changes that we're making as a company. So. Cool. Well, let's start with this API. So this is the API that we're going to be kind of working with today. And there's all kinds of information on here that you can look up, like monsters, and you can look up equipment, things like that. But today we're going to keep it pretty simple. We're just going to call spells, and so we're basically going to pass through through our API. We're going to go call this API to look up some spell data. We're going to parse some of that, and then we'll return some data, and then we'll call the API back again, and we'll have it actually do like a dice roll for us. So Eric is asking in chat, are we doing a minimal or a controller API today? That's a great question for Sam. So Sam's going to coach me through from scratch. How do we get started with this? I've got .NET installed on my system. So I'm going to switch my screen share back over to, sorry, I just realized I shared my screen, but I didn't actually show it to everybody. So let me go back and do that real quick. Let me switch over to here, and I'm just going to close chat here for just a moment, and we'll share my screen. So sorry about that. So this is our release notes page. So you can come through here and you can find all the things that we've changed, and then the blog post as well. So I'll drop these links in chat for everybody if you'd like to follow along. I'm going to paste them on LinkedIn as well as over here as well. So you're welcome to go check out the guest blog post, and then the actual API that we're going to be using today. Going to drop this in chat as well, and this is what we're going to be building. So Sam, why don't you give us a bit of like a really high level, like what, so Eric had a great question in chat about like what kind of API are we building today? Do you want to kind of give me a high level idea of like what I'm getting into here?
Yeah, we're going to be looking at controllers probably. That's what I used when I was implementing this, but we can talk about both. I'd intended to kind of talk about both, using both of them. So
Okay.
the minimal API is sort of your way of, if you've used Flask, for example, where you say this
Mm-hmm.
endpoint returns this, and run this function, return a result. Similar idea there. So you can actually create an entire API in a single file. The idea of controllers is you separate out things into different controllers that manage different things. So if you're thinking about REST, you have different objects that you can do actions on. Your controllers are those objects. So you can actually define this controller is for spells. This controller is for dice. So
Right.
things like that.
Good separation of concerns and isolation of the work that you're doing. We're gonna get pretty janky with it today, and we're just gonna like put all this in one file probably, and just keep it as quick and as simple as possible. We're gonna aim for like maybe an hour or so to build out the actual API, and then we'll switch gears and we'll go into Postman a little bit as well, and then I'll have Sam share their screen, and then we'll actually like get into writing out some Postman code as well. So hope you're good with JavaScript, because we'll be getting nerdy with JavaScript on that side when we get there.
I'm okay. So this will be interesting. It sounds like
Learning
one
for
of
both of
the
us here.
yeah, one of the big bosses is going to be the compilers.
Hmm.
So okay, this will be interesting for the audience. We didn't really like we talked about what we wanted to do, but neither of us really know the other thing that we're teaching. So we're kind of learning alongside you.
Yep.
So we're gonna have lots of questions, I'm sure.
So it'd be
So
a good test of our learning, but also how well we can teach on both sides for sure.
yeah.
All right.
So where
Cool.
do we
Let's
start?
dive in. So here's my editor. So I've got .NET installed. I've got like version 7 of the .NET tools installed on my Windows machine. Now .NET. So a common misconception is .NET is like a Windows thing, but .NET you can build .NET code for Linux and Mac and mobile and all that kind of stuff. Am I right, Sam? So it's
Yeah.
a lot more
So
versatile.
yeah. .NET originally was a Windows thing. um, so it's part of so we're working with C# today. .NET is broader than that. It allows you to interact with lots of different languages. There's a similar to how Java, the JVM allows you to run uh, Java code as well as like Groovy code or other things that are compatible and compile into that. Similar
Hmm.
idea with what you get with .NET. The .NET framework is sort of what ends up running all of that, or gives you the ability to run all of that. And
Okay.
so we end up there. In this case, we're going to just be generating different things. You actually, I think this is from your .NET new list command, and you
Yeah.
can see there's a whole bunch of templates there. You can also see there's a list of languages there. So you can actually
Yeah.
pick different languages. There's F#, Visual Basic. There's other languages as well that integrate with this. So in the past, for example, part of like a modernization, we used .NET to take an old C++ app and write interfaces in C# so we could all keep everything
Oh,
in
cool.
code and continue developing the project.
Okay.
So yeah, we're going to be working with web APIs though.
All right.
So
So
uh,
we do have an option for that as a short name here. So this is what we're actually going to get started with on the command line to say I want to go build a web API. All right.
yep.
So where do I go from here? I do like .NET new, is it web API, and then do I give it like
Yep.
a folder name or?
So the way you can do this is, or the way that I like to do this is navigate to the sort of top level directory of where you want to be, and then do
Mhm.
.NET new web API. That's the template that you're going to use. If you just
Okay.
run that, it is going to run it in your current directory and generate the files right where you are. A lot of the times I'm using multiple different projects for different things. So for like example, in our case, we have our API, but then we also have things like a client app that consumes the API.
Mhm.
So you might want your project to have both of those. And so if you pass in a name, so just dash dash name, that will create a directory and put all the contents in there. And then you can
Okay.
use that as sort of your working space.
All right. Sounds good. And then what are we going to call this? I think we kind of teased it in the live stream. We're slaying monsters with D&D and Postman and .NET. Should we? So what should we call this? Like
I
spells
think
are
when you,
us.
I think
What?
when you sent me the initial spec, it was Spell Slayer 3000, um, which is exactly what I called it.
All
So
right. We'll go with that.
you
So spell
you can
Slayer
call it
3000.
whatever you like. Um,
All right. So does this look good? So new web API dash dash name, and then you said it's going to make that folder, and I'll open that in VS Code.
yeah. So your name is actually covering
Mhm.
up your terminal there.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
um,
Um,
so maybe, but just so other
all
people
right.
can see, you might want to if you could just move your screen up a bit. I think that would help.
Yeah, I actually can't. So I'm sharing the window. So unfortunately, it's
Ah,
gonna
well,
cover that up in here. So,
all right. What happened?
um, all right, unable to resolve Microsoft ASP.NET Core Open API and Swashbuckle ASP.NET Core. So it looks like
Um,
I'm maybe missing a few things. So .NET Restore. Is that gonna fix that for me?
I've
Specify
never.
a project or solution file. Current working directory does not contain a project.
So I have a question, because
Yeah.
we were doing this quickly before the screen. How did you get um your Postman to or your CLI to C.NET? Did you like manually go and add the
I
thing?
don't think I manually added anything. I think I just downloaded like the .NET installation package and it added it into my terminal for me somehow. Eric is asking maybe it's a build template. Do I need to update something about my build templates?
Maybe, but if you've never done .NET before, it should just work. um, sorry.
Works on my machine. Doesn't work on
Yeah.
mine.
So what you're getting there, just to kind of quickly talk about that error, is you're getting when you create this project, it's going to say, here's a bunch of different things. The error you're
Hmm.
getting is from NuGet, which is the package manager for .NET.
Okay.
So it manages the packages. There's two that are missing, which are the two that are required by the project. You have the Open API and the Swashbuckle um, specs, and both of those are missing. Uh, and I'm not entirely sure why right now. Um,
So
sorry,
if
this
I
is.
go in, no worries. So if I go into that folder and I do .NET restore,
So
nope.
I don't think that's going to fix it. I think this is an issue with the package manager that you have. Um, what we can do, we were talking about this before. Uh, do you want to add this to like PowerShell and we can work from there,
Sure.
and then
Yeah,
we
let's do that.
can. Okay. Um,
So I'll
all right.
switch my shell over to this. Now, my PowerShell, I can't run .NET. So let me navigate back over here. So temp Postman. Um, oops. So I can't call .NET over here. Oh, wait, now I can. All right. So, all right. I wasn't able to do this earlier, but apparently it does work in my PowerShell. So
Burning all things at once.
should I just try and remake the project?
Can you show me the directory? I think it actually did create the project. I think you're running into other issues with your installation, if that's helpful, because you have the
Okay.
project, you have all the files in it. So all of that worked.
Okay.
It's just actually building the project. What it's trying to do is actually test those installed packages and make sure everything's still there. And
Gotcha.
that's
Okay.
not working for some reason. So I'm imagining there's some connection issue with NuGet. Um, I don't know the best way to fix this. um, I yeah.
Should I try and um should I try
Sorry.
and remake the project from PowerShell? Will that like maybe change anything, or is it still? I guess it's still looking at what I have installed, and it's maybe missing these components or something.
So let me quickly. Um, I'm wondering if it's an issue with how NuGet got configured. So the way NuGet works is there's a big public repository of all these different things of where you can go and
Hmm.
find them.
Okay.
That's typically where these packages would come from. Another thing you can do is add, like, if you're on a corporate network, for example, and you have your own internal tools and libraries and things like that, you can have your own repository, which would have other things. Um, my guess, just based off of this error and like
Mhm.
packages that exist, because I can pull them, don't exist on your machine, is you might not be able to reach that location. So, uh, um, sorry, I'm trying to think about the best way to solve this.
Would it be an ad blocker issue?
Potentially,
So I
if you
do.
block certain domains, it could be the issue. Um,
Okay.
but
Let's see if no, that didn't work. So I shut off my ad blocking for a little while, but that doesn't appear to have helped.
so what we can do is quickly, I guess, make sure your NuGet config is correct. So I'm
Okay.
going to here. If I can show you, sort of, I think what
Yeah.
I'm
Let
looking at,
me
and you can.
share your screen here.
Okay. So this is sort of the documentation about your NuGet config. What you would
Okay.
want to do, I think, we open up our thing, our terminal, and just go to here. So oh, uh, sorry, wrong thing. um, Go to the config, NuGet. This is inside of your user directory. Why? Okay. Sorry. This
So
is
is that in my Windows user home directory that I find that .config?
yeah.
Okay.
Let me quickly get into this. um, Sorry, everyone. I didn't anticipate this. That's my bad. So there's configuration here. The other thing we can do is try to actually like reinstall and see if that fixes it. Otherwise,
Okay.
I can sort of walk you through this. It might not be best to debug this live, I guess, because I don't really know. So what we could do um, is there a way for me to? Yeah, I can send you a thing. So let's do that.
Okay.
um, this is sorry, this is weird, but let's do a. Uh, do this. um, and this probably isn't ideal. But I'm just going to create something and move this off screen and then get a live share link and send you this.
Okay.
And you should be able to join that way. And then I can help you out offline fix this. And if other people run
Sure.
into this too, um, I can try to help there too. I'm just off the top of my head, it's not an error that I've seen.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
So what we're going to get into here is we're actually going to use the live share extension in VS Code so that we can actually work on this together.
Yeah. And I think I can give you, this could actually be kind of an interesting thing with Postman and this as well, because I can actually share the URL as well. Can I maximize my screen? Absolutely. Is that
Sweet.
better?
Yep, that should be good.
Right.
Thanks, Salim, for asking.
Right.
And then there's a private chat inside of Restream, Sam, that you can use to send me any links or anything like that.
Yep. Sorry, one sec. I need to do some sign-in bits.
Okay.
I think. All right.
Cool. While Sam's doing that, we did have a question come in a little bit earlier asking what the updates were. So we start all of our live streams with, in case you missed it, we talked a little bit about some, there's a guest post on our blog about some GraphQL schema, like to turn a GraphQL schema into a Postman collection that you can check out on the Postman blog. And we also shared like the new release updates, just some bug fixes and so on in the application. Last week, Joyce and Pooja and a guest, they were talking about some upcoming changes in 2023. We're going to be changing up the interface a little bit for simplicity. And we're also, they talked about a VS Code extension that Postman has been working on to have Postman inside of VS Code as well. So we're really excited about that. There's a wait list that you can join for the VS Code extension as well. So yeah, you can go check out last week's live stream. Should still be available on LinkedIn, and we put all of these live streams on YouTube. So we're streaming live on YouTube right now, but you can check out our YouTube channel and go check that out as well.
All right. So hopefully you have a link now and
Okay.
can join. We'll see how this goes. I've already run the .NET New thing, so you're already in the directory.
Okay.
And then we can do this. And I can also share a terminal. VS Live Share lets you send a link to somebody, either read-only or with write access to either files or your terminal, or to share a port. So if you're working on a server like we're going to be, you could share the port for that, and it would actually be mirrored over to your server, so you can actually see all those
Nice.
different things and start actually interacting with it. So let's do this. I can give you read or write access to that. There you go.
Okay. Just got to sign back into GitHub here. Try this again. All right, I think that worked.
Cool.
All right,
Awesome.
let me go back, and I'm gonna change over to my screen here.
Perfect.
Cool. So I think we're up and running.
Cool. So inside of that Postman folder, you should be able to see a project. This is the default one that we created.
Okay.
And this is actually kind of neat because then I can actually show you different things. You can actually see where I am
sweet.
and do those different things. So this works similar to like a shared Word doc or something like that, where you can all jump in and collaborate. You can even, there's a chat and comments and things like that. That lets you do all those things. You can see the terminal. You should be able to also run things in the terminal. So why don't we try this?
.NET Run.
Yeah, there you go.
Yes, trying to build something. I know that much about .NET. So
Cool.
Yeah, it looks like something's listening on a local host. So,
Okay. So before, well, actually, see if this works. Let me share. My port. um, and we'll call this something. Sure. But you should have a port now. That port that's shown there should also be available on your computer as well. And so you should actually have access to be able to call web requests against this API.
so when you
Um,
say port, what should I be looking for?
so you should be able to access it on like localhost 5255. So the same
Oh,
port,
okay.
I just reshared the same port over to your screen. So you should have access to it and should be able to actually hopefully make
Oh, really?
requests against it. Yeah. We shut it
Localhost
down, so let's
5255.
run this
Oh,
quick.
okay.
um, and there we go. Um, and then, so if I go here and
So
go to
I
Postman,
cannot access localhost 5255.
you get a 404.
This localhost page can't be found. Yep.
That seems correct. So that's also what I get. Because what we did is we created a web API. This isn't a website. This
Okay.
is an API that we're creating.
Okay.
So let's quickly. I guess there's
This
a
would be
few
a
things.
good use case for Postman.
It would be. So we already have a few things that got created as part of this.
Okay.
So let's take a quick look at the code because there's some really fun parts that are happening here to actually make this work. Um, so yeah, we have Swagger generation that gets added automatically. So we're doing OpenAPI generation. We're generating these specs, and that's all happening automatically. So we don't need to do anything. Eric has the correct thing. The default template is a weather forecast.
Okay.
So there's nothing in here that is going to refer to that weather forecast. It's all determined automatically for you. There was the question about minimal APIs versus controllers. This is the controller spec. So you can see there's that controller folder directory. That's going to be
Mhm.
where those are defined. And then you can also see we have a like entire Swagger thing that we can go and use. In this case, we're actually adding the UI and we're adding the JSON object that you can just go and use. And that all comes just default with the app. So you can actually use that and make calls. The default endpoint for the JSON file is swagger/v1/swagger.json. You can
Gotcha.
change
Okay.
that if you would like. But if you use that, you can just plug that directly into Postman and you'll actually get everything.
Sweet.
So
So just to show everybody here, so Sam currently has that set up on their screen, and I can go into my desktop Postman and I can hit localhost. So by default, the web client for Postman won't connect to localhost. There is a plugin that you can install. It'll be down in the lower right corner of the interface. You can actually install like a local desktop agent, and that will allow you to call localhost. So I've actually pulled up the desktop version of the application right now, so that I can natively hit localhost. I don't have to worry about installing that other library. But if you're using Postman in a web browser, there'll be an option down here in the bottom right corner of the UI that will allow you to install the desktop or the desktop agent. Which will allow you to hit localhost while you're still in your browser. So, so thanks to Eric's hint, I can actually call weather forecast, and we actually get weather coming directly from our starter API so far. All right, cool. Well, let's dive in. So we've got about an hour or so, and we've got to get through some Postman stuff as well. The Postman stuff, I'm guessing, is going to take like 10, 15 minutes. So we got about 45 minutes or so to build out an API here. So
cool.
where do we want to get started with this, Sam?
Let's talk you through a little bit about what's actually happening here because there's actually quite a bit. um,
Okay.
do you have any questions first about like what just happened or why this works or how this works or
Not yet. I think I've used enough of these framework scaffolds to know that it's set up some code and it's got like the basic thing up and running. If I really want to dig in and dive in on what each part does, I'm sure there's some really great documentation on all of that. Um, so right now, just kind of browsing through a little bit, we can see that it's potentially using some authorization. It's got some code to actually go run the API. So it's right now, I think I'm in an okay spot actually to start working. So in the controllers folder, I do see that weather forecast controller, and I presume that that's where we just continue to add like whatever other code that we're going to do. Um,
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about how that weather controller actually gets called. So inside of the program, that CS file, that's sort of the default entry point for your program. That's
okay.
where everything starts. Um, this is using top level statements, I believe is the term for that. So there's
Okay.
no namespace, there's no class definition. That is automatically generated for you. So you can just write code. Like the default shortest thing you can write is just console.writeLine hello world. And that's a valid program. It knows how to figure out where the references are and how to do all of that. This is doing that, but with more stuff. um,
Okay.
the sort of important bits that kind of matter for our use cases are the Swagger generations. We have a service. Um, these are things that can be injected into your runtime to actually do specific things. Like loggers, for example, are a common thing, or telemetry data, things like that you might want to use in different things, or a database agent that handles your connection pool and things like that. You can use these as services that are shared between multiple requests to your API, so you don't like generate a new database connection every single time somebody tries to call your API, um, things like that. And then the
Okay.
other thing we're doing is actually adding things to our app, so things that we're actually servicing. In this case, we have Swagger and the UI that we're adding. Um, this is from those NuGet packages that you were running into.
Right.
All of that is managed inside of the CS project, which is your sort of definition of the project, defines where things are and how all of that works. In this case, we have this item group with package references that are saying, here's the version of this that I'm going to use. And then it should automatically restore those when you build, um, and do all that. It also defines things like the target framework. So we're working with .NET 7, which is the newest version. Um, and then there's a few other things. We're going to ignore those. um, it's not really relevant for what we're doing. Um, yeah, I think that's
Sweet.
mostly everything there. Um,
Okay. Now I noticed at the root level there's the program.cs, but then there's also a weather forecast.cs.
yep.
Um,
So if we click into that, this is just a class object. And what this is
okay.
actually doing is these are using properties. So there's different ways to access things in languages. There's classes, or there's like classes, there's fields, which are sort of your integers and your floating point values and things like that. And then there's also properties. And in this case, what properties are sort of a wrapper for getters and setters
Yeah.
inside of the language. So this lets you invoke a getter and setter without having to actually go and do any of those things, without having to write them. And it means you can chain them like a normal variable.
Oh,
Um,
nice. Okay.
yeah. And then the way this is working is there's get and set sort of defined there. Um, that's
So if
just
you
saying
want
use the
so if you want read-only access, you would remove the set keyword on that line.
Yep. There's also a init thing. That's a more new feature, and you can use that
Okay.
as a way to initialize the variable. But these do not have to be just unlike this. They can be implemented. So if we want, we can have get go and do return 100.
Oh, okay.
So
Interesting.
like something like that. It's not going to like this because that's just me making up syntax on the spot, but
Yeah.
similar idea. You can
Okay.
create things and kind of have it. That's what's happening down here with the temperature dot Fahrenheit. It's a
Right.
property, that is automatically doing the conversion from Celsius to Fahrenheit for you, and then just returning that like a normal value.
Yeah.
So
Great. Okay.
cool.
So from here, we're going to need to then, I guess, create a model for what we're going to be doing in our API and then go write that controller code for it. Is that right?
Yep. So if you look at like what we do right now, when you call that web API, this is what you get back. You get back this date, the temperatures, and then the summary. So
Yep.
you'll actually that's how this is working. And then
Okay.
all the serialization and stuff is handled by the framework for you. So you don't need to do any of that. So yeah, that's our first step is let's create a class and define what we're going to return, and then we can
Okay.
move on from there.
All right. Sounds good. So I'm just going to create a new file then, and we'll call it, what are we going to call it? Just spells?
Yeah. Do you want to share your screen and we can sort
Yeah.
of let you drive and I'll just watch and we can
Yeah.
figure it out.
Tell me what to do as we go. All right, so I'm just going to pull this over to the side here just so I can kind of look at this other one. So we need our namespace in here. And then we'll have a public class, and we'll just call this spells. And okay, so what kind of information do we want to get back? So what we want to do for our API is we want to give it the name of a spell to go look up from that other third-party API. But what do we need to return back? We're going to need to grab the I guess the damage dice roll from that third-party API. So we're going to have to return back the dice, like the number of dice and the size of the dice. So how do we differentiate in here between the parameters that we're taking in from the user versus what we're returning? Is that part of this, or is this just the response?
So we could do a few different things. I think the first thing we probably want to decide is, well, okay, I'm gonna roll that back. I think we should separate out, kind of sticking with the theme of separation of concerns. I think we should have
Mhm.
a different input object and a different output object.
Okay.
They could use overlapping types internally, but I think having them separate so we can change them later would be good.
Okay.
We might not even need a input type. We could just use like route parameters or query parameters, and those
Okay.
can be defined inline if we want. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that'll be fine. So yeah, so just as an example, we could call, spells, and then we'll do like fireball, and then like level 5 or something like that. And so we'll just parse out the name from the URI path for the name of the spell, and then the last thing will be like the level of the spell that we're going to cast. Something like that.
Yep. And then let's just make an API that returns those two things. So it just
Okay.
pulls those things out and just returns them back as like a JSON object to you. How
Okay.
does that sound?
Sounds good. So I'm guessing we're going to need a public string then of the name of the spell.
Yep.
And then I'll need, just for simplicity, we'll do this. And then we'll need a public, probably an integer then for the level. And we'll do a get and a set for that. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Look at me, I'm
looks
writing C#.
It's not too hard.
Yeah. So should I rename this file then? Because you mentioned having like different input and output. So should this be like our spell, request and then spell response? Like what would the typical way of sort of separating that out?
I think naming is hard. And so
Yeah.
I've seen people do almost everything.
Okay.
My naming scheme changes pretty regularly. I think the important thing is mostly keeping it consistent. And then I think your example of using request and response is a good one that is used inside of the language as sort of a thing that does that. I think it's using result as the end return value usually, but
Okay.
we can define that how we want. So yeah.
Okay. So what should we do? Like, are we going to make a separate file, or can we define a second class inside of this thing, or is it typical that you'd have a different class in a different file?
So my preference is to keep classes separate. Not everybody everybody follows that, especially with these kind of parsing models and like data
Okay.
models. You end up with lots of class files that feels like a little bit more boilerplate than actually doing useful things. You
Okay.
can do either though. Either will work. The only difference there is you can't have multiple files with top level statements. So like what we did with that program file, or you
hmm
can't do that multiple places because then it doesn't know how to start your
Which
program.
one to? Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. All right, sounds good. So what should we do from here? Like, what would your preference be? Just for the sake of brevity and time, like, what should I be doing here?
Do you need a weather controller anymore, or can we just recycle
Nope.
that entire class?
Yeah,
So
we could
we can
recycle that.
just
Sure.
we could just remove that weather forecast. How about like we can just delete that class? I think we don't need it. um,
Okay.
and then go into the controller, and you should be able to take a look at how that works. um,
Okay. So let's make a new one here. So we'll just call it like spells controller. Yes. And then bring this over here just for reference. Okay. So this is telling us we're using our model view controller design pattern, that our namespace is coming from Postman controllers. And then now it looks like the syntax is changing a little bit. We're doing some, almost looks like configuration options here for API controller with the route of controller.
yeah,
Um,
so these are
okay.
ways to annotate your classes and sort of add additional metadata to them. So in this case, we're saying this is an API controller. This is responsible for controlling our APIs. And we're also giving it a route. So in this case, the controller in the square brackets is a special
hmm
case, and that's going to actually say, look at the name of the class, get rid of controller, and use the rest. So that's why we could hit weather forecast
Oh, okay.
and get a result because it's figuring out the route dynamically from
Ah,
the class name. But
clever. Okay.
you can give it an explicit name if you want, or define something custom. You can do whatever you
Okay.
want. Um,
So since we called the file name spells controller, we'll keep the name of the class. We'll have the word spells plural in here as well, so that then we'll have a route of slash spells.
yep, that sounds
Okay.
good.
All right. And then, so inside of here, how do we define the URI path then? So we wanted this to be like spells fireball 5. So how do we define these dynamic components on a route here? Or is this part of the controller, or is that done somewhere else?
So the way this works is we're going to define functions just like we would in any other class.
Okay.
Your API endpoints are just functions that return some special stuff and have a little bit of extra annotations around them to
Okay.
make sure that it knows how to handle certain parameters. So we can
Okay.
just create a get method. Does the get sound good? We
Sure.
can,
Yep.
yeah. So let's just create a public get method. So public void for now, just so it actually, yeah, use your class, use spells. That'll be fine.
Okay.
And
We
then
got some
get,
nice auto completion going in here.
yeah.
And then get is going to be uppercase or lowercase?
Uh, Typically it's uppercase. So properties and functions are typically uppercase as well as classes. So it
Okay.
uses Pascal case, I think is the term for that. And then
Okay.
field names are camel cased, typically. So
Okay.
some people will put underscores in front of things. I think that's done in the default for the logger.
Okay.
But
Now,
yeah.
do I need this sort of line that we have here on line 21 of our weather forecast? Do I need to define this before my actual get method?
Yep. So the way those annotations work is when you put them in above something, it applies that to whatever's below it. So the thing
Okay.
that follows it gets that annotation. So
So
in
it's
this
like a
case,
Python decorator, basically?
yep, it's similar to that. I think most languages have these. I think in Java, it's like the at operator, and you can do like at something. It's been a while since I've used Java, but
Okay.
you can, yeah, annotate things. There's a whole bunch of things, and then behind the scenes, because of the way .NET works, where it's not compiling into your final code that's actually running, it's compiling into an intermediate language that is then interpreted and run that way. Those are
Okay.
accessible at runtime, so you can actually look that up and figure out how to do things with that.
Okay.
So yeah, And then that implementation of our get method that's our API. So
Sweet.
yeah.
All right. So in here, I'm just going to write out some notes. So we're going to call our D&D API for the spell name and level, and we're going to return the name and the level back again. So before we actually call that, let's just send back like some static data. So I'm going to need. So you said the serialization happens kind of automatically for us?
Yep, you just need to return a spells, and it knows that you're expecting JSON as a result.
Okay.
It can actually do other things as well, but the default is going to be a JSON serialization.
Okay. So how do I sort of build a static content version of this? Like, how do I make a variable out of, like, how do I new up one of these classes into an object to return here?
Let's
What would be?
try just doing, so the keyword for creating a new version of a class is new. Um, so you do new and then either the name of it, and then two parentheses, and that will create your class. We could add a constructor to this, so you can actually construct it in there. For these, I find that adds just a little bit of extra. So what you can do instead is actually access those properties at the time of construction. So we can actually connect to that initialization bit that we talked about
Okay.
and do some other things with that. So you can keep the return statement,
Oh, okay.
and we can just do this all in sort of one line. And then you do just a curly bracket, just like you're containing something and you're just creating a data object. So two curly brackets, and you should be able to then access and provide the names of the properties that you defined. So you can do name equals something, and then a comma, and then level equals something else, and you'll get a result.
Okay. Now, do I need to like stop and restart the server, or does this just kind of automatically update for us?
We can make that happen. So there's a .NET watch command that I use a bunch. So what this is going to do is just watch this directory, and every time that you make things, you'll see this tick away now. Sorry, I did that for you.
No, that's okay.
Right. We have a few things. We deleted that class object, so we can also get rid of the controller that we were looking at,
Okay.
and just remove that as well.
Okay. Done.
And that should fix it. And you'll see the build will kick off
Oh yeah,
automatically
it
again.
restarts. Very cool.
And so this is kind of a way to kind of do that. And now
Yep.
it should be available, and you should be able to call it.
And sure enough, in Postman, I do see hello with the level 5 coming in here. So just for the simplicity of not having to like unshare the screen, share my other screen, then come back to the editor, it really is. I'll just paste the response. So this is what I'm seeing in Postman when this comes back. So it's building out our response for us. All right, cool. So from here, then let's actually go. So how can we add those, like the name of the spell and the level of the spell as dynamic path parameters, so that we can then go call, our API. So let's start by grabbing the name and the level out of our dynamic path, and can we initialize this and just verify that those are working, and then we'll actually go call our third-party API.
Sure. And again, these are just functions, so you can actually add all sorts of things. Hello,
Okay.
chat. So inside of Git, you can just add parameters like you would normally. And it will do validation for you. So we have an integer for level. So if you define that as an int as the input, it's going to validate that the type is an int and that it can convert that. Otherwise, you're going to get an error response from the server.
Okay.
So for those, I would recommend lowercase, just as a naming convention. It's
Okay.
And then we have both of those, and so you can now access those inside of the scope. So
Now, do these parameters automatically turn into dynamic path variables, or are these like query parameters that would get passed?
I think the default is going to be a route, or it's going to be a query parameter. So the default
Okay.
for those is query parameters, which I don't think we want. We can add another annotation to kind of fix that though. So you can actually add from route as an annotation to both of those parameters, and that
Mhm.
will define them as something that you want to come from the route.
Okay. So how do I tell it that this is coming from the route? So
So in the
I tested it with the parameters, and the query parameters come through fine.
Yep, perfect. So take a look at the parameter or the arguments that you're passing into the function. You want
Mhm.
to annotate those with where they're coming from because they could come from different things. Like you could have something coming from the body of your query request,
Okay.
and so that you can pass like a more complex like request object in and have it parse it out. You can also have square brackets from route, and that's actually going to say this should come from the route of.
Oh, interesting.
Yep.
So while we're defining out these parameters, we can say name comes from the body and level comes from a query parameter and something else actually comes from like a dynamic route parameter.
Yep, and you can kind of mix and match all of those to
Neat.
kind of match whatever your API is supposed to do, and then the Open API spec generation then it does is going to figure that out and actually give you back a spec that matches that.
Wow, that's
So
pretty neat.
yep,
Okay.
so just in front
So
of the string, just write from route. You're good.
like literally just like that.
Using the same annotation thing we used for like the top of the API controller and things like that, it works the same way with a similar naming scheme too.
Okay. So what's wrong with my syntax?
Capital F, no space, and a capital R. So
Oh, okay. Oh,
these
I
are
get you.
classes. They're not keywords, so these are defined
Gotcha.
by yeah.
Okay. All right.
Now this
So
isn't gonna work still because we don't know what the route is, right? We said these are coming from the route, but we don't actually know what the route is supposed to look like. Is level
okay.
supposed to come first, or is the name supposed to come first? So one of the parameters for that HTTP GET is the route that you can provide.
Okay.
Um, so what you're doing right now is providing a name, sort of giving the endpoint a name. By doing that, you kind of skip the constructor of the thing. You say this is the named parameter for this specific argument.
Hmm.
The
Okay.
the first argument for that function for HTTP GET is the route that you want to use.
Okay.
So in front of that, you can just specify the route using curly brackets and then the name of the thing you want to map. Um, so it's just a string. Um,
Okay. So am I getting rid of name then and
you can.
replacing it with something else?
Um,
Okay.
that name shows up in your spec, in your Open API spec. That's where that's
Oh,
gonna
okay.
be available. Um,
Okay. All
but
right.
yeah, but
We'll leave that in for now. So what? So tell me what I need to add here.
create a string.
Okay.
So quotes and a comma afterwards, and then inside of that, inside of the curly brackets, match the route to the names that you're mapping in your get parameters. So you'd have
Okay. So this
spells
would be
and
like
level.
name and level.
You don't need the top level thing because that's coming from the controller. So the way
Oh,
the
okay.
path is constructed is you have your API, and then you have your controller saying I'm at this location, and then you also have individual functions that can have sub paths under that, but they all
Okay.
stack on top of each other.
And
Um,
it's literally just string matching name with the name of the variable that I'm passing in here.
Yep, but because you can add like actually explicit strings to this, you might want to add like a version number and like hard code something else into this to signify that it should match those. Use curly brackets, and that just says this is this parameter.
Okay. So like that.
Yep. And now, hopefully, you
All
should be able to
right.
actually get it from your path.
So when I call slash spells slash fireball slash 4, I get no data back. I get a 404 not found.
Um,
So I'm calling it like this. Slash spells slash fireball slash 4, and I get a 404 error.
Interesting. Let me. I do too. Let's quickly restart this. And see if that fixes it.
No, I still get a 404.
Did I map? Oh,
Oh, if I don't have spells in the path, if I just call Fireball 4, it works. So I think we do need to specify spells in the route here.
I know what's going on. um,
Okay.
okay, this is why we're getting different results. You had the slash at the front of your string,
Okay.
and that was making it look at like the top level. If you get
Oh,
rid of
okay.
that, it should fix that.
Okay. It does indeed. Sweet. All
Perfect.
right.
Okay.
So now that we've got these values coming in, now we can go figure out how do we go call our third-party API. So let me go look up that documentation here real quick and go figure out how do we actually call this. It doesn't look like we need any kind of authentication for it, which is nice. I think we can literally just call the spells endpoint. Just go look that
Yeah,
up
you
here
should
real
just be able
quick.
to send a public GET request to that endpoint, and it should just return back a result. Um, I'm going to add in sort of the generated classes that I have to match the response that we're going to get. And then you
Okay.
can use those. Does that make sense? And we can,
Sure, that's fine.
okay.
So I dropped the link to the third-party API that we're using here. Um,
So I added a whole bunch of classes. um, they're not named particularly well. I think one of them is called class one, which is very descriptive. um, but the way I made those is actually just going into Visual Studio and doing paste as class. So you can take a JSON object and just paste that JSON object. So taking a response from an API and just pasting that as classes, so you can
okay.
actually interpret that. We could use dynamic objects, but that's helpful for like scripting. But I find that when you start actually trying to do that in like an enterprise type application where you start scaling this up, the technical debt from that starts kind of piling up and weird bugs start happening. So just trying to do some static stuff, but that
Okay.
should give you the ability to actually parse this out, and all the parsing should happen for you. So
Okay.
yeah.
Cool. So if we go look at that real quick, so we got our index name, description. Yep. Okay. Cool. So thanks for doing that for the sake of time here. So then in our spells controller, then all right, so we'll take that out. We had a question in chat. Just dropped in, wondering if this function we're seeing handles giving cantrips a level of 0. That's a good question.
I don't
We,
know.
we haven't gotten that far yet, Vikram, but it's a great question for sure. So ultimately, this is the endpoint that we want to hit. So we want to call this dnd5e api.co/api/spells/ whatever our name is. How do we pass the level into that? I'm curious. Like, how do I tell it that I'm calling Fireball at level 5?
So the response is for all levels, and so we have to actually do a
Oh,
dictionary
okay.
lookup inside of the response.
Oh, I see.
So
I
that's how
gotcha.
that works. So you get
Cool.
the spell information, and then our side we're taking at the level because that's our use case. Is I'm a
I gotcha.
5th level wizard casting X.
Okay.
How much damage is that going to do? Not
Uh,
what is all of the information I can know about Fireball. So that's our transformation case here.
Okay.
So to do this, we just need an HTTP client. So that's, I think, where we'll start.
Okay.
So you can just create that. That's another class that we're going to create.
So we'll do that here at the top level.
No, the HTTP client is something we're going to be consuming. So this is a class that
Oh,
we want
okay.
to use inside of our function, and we're just
Gotcha.
going to
Okay.
write the implementation. So
Okay.
HTTP
Sweet.
clients are how you make web requests. It can do synchronous and asynchronous calls. The trend is towards asynchronous stuff. That's typically what people are going to do. We can convert your function into an async function so that that will just work. That gives you the ability to do like some multi-threaded concurrent tasks more easily. So accessing file systems, accessing API calls, because sometimes those can take a bit. So it prevents, like if you have a UI, it prevents it from just freezing your UI while you're getting a response, things like that.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can call this client whatever you want. And the way you do that is just space and then the name. And then
Okay.
you can just do equals new. And you don't even need the class name here. You can actually just use new. And because you define the class name on the left-hand side and you're saying, I want a new thing of that, it knows the type to use.
Oh, interesting.
Only
Okay.
need to define the type once.
Cool. All right.
So you can then do same constructor. So the constructor is just on that new parameter. And in this case, the constructor is empty. And then we just need to give that a base address. So the same way you provided information to spells, we're going to give a base address to this. And that's going to be the address to your API that you want to call.
Okay. And then in C#, how do we sort of concatenate the string in here? Like, is there like a string interpolation in C#?
There is. We'll talk
Okay.
about that. Let's point this just at the API. So like /API might be a good like base level API because that's the API we're hitting.
Oh, okay. Right.
And then we can actually, for individual calls, we can actually invoke different things.
Okay.
In like bigger applications, you might not define your HTTP clients inside of your calls. This could be something that you would define globally
Okay.
and then inject in.
So it doesn't like the fact that I just put a string in here. Looks like it needs something to be a system.uri.
Yeah, so do new URI and pass in that parameter. And then it should. And that is a constructor, so you can actually just pass that in.
Like that.
Yep, there you go.
There we go. Sweet. Okay, so now on our client, then we want to figure out how to add that to our overall URL that we're constructing here. So what do I need to do with client from here?
So you want to do a git call, so .git async. So all these calls are going to be asynchronous. You're going to get errors for that. That's fine. And then just the path, the additional path. So spells / whatever it is.
So in this case, we want to pass in the name of what we got on our route. So how do we add this? Is it just like some languages you can do the plus?
So a lot of people did used to use the plus. That was replaced with string interpolation. And so the thing you wrote initially was almost right. What you need to do is tell the string that it's supposed to be an interpolated string. And that you do that by putting a $sign in front of it. And that will just say,
sweet.
This is that. And then it will find things inside of your curly brackets and use them as parameters.
So, okay. So we do $. So this is very much like JavaScript then.
Yep.
Double quotes.
Yep.
Okay.
Double quotes, and then you still need the $ as well.
Yep. Yeah, I got the at the beginning of the quotes as well.
Just at the beginning, you don't need it anywhere else in the string.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
I got you.
And then you can see
there we
it.
go. Yep.
It gets
The color syntax and so on changed.
Yep.
Sweet. Okay.
And so this isn't giving you any errors yet. But what you're doing is you're firing off an asynchronous call and then forgetting about it.
Right.
So that will complete.
So we want to wait for it.
That will complete sometime. And so the way you do that is you call await. These async functions almost always end with async. So get async or load file async, things like that. That just kind of lets you know that you need to await this.
Okay.
Await is going to say, wait for this to finish and then pass the value off to the left-hand side. So you can then store the result of that asynchronous call in the left-hand side. And then these tasks also do some nice things like actually correctly hooking into exception handling. which multi-threading doesn't always do normally. So this is
Mhm.
kind of nice. For the
Okay.
result, you can just use var, because var is just
It'll
a catch-all. It will automatically
it'll
figure
figure
out the
out.
name
Yeah.
and figure out
Okay.
what it
And
is.
then looks like I need to make my function asynchronous, so it's complaining that I can't do an await because the function that this instruction is in is not an asynchronous call. So
Yeah,
is
so we need to change the signature of your function just a little bit. So add a async keyword to the front of that. And then
okay.
all async functions need to return a task. So task uh, with the generic property of spells. And all that's saying is that this is going to return a task, and that way everybody else who calls this knows that it's an async call and it needs to be awaited.
Okay.
So instead of returning spells from this now, just return task with the spells in it.
So like angle brackets.
Yep, you got it.
Okay. Lucky guess. All right. And it looks like
Perfect.
we got some kind of error output here when it tried to restart.
Uh,
Unhandled exception has occurred. Conflict matching path combination gets spells. So right now we're returning new spells. So do we need to tell it to build a task to return instead?
I think this is just a overlapping issue because we're hot reloading things. I
Oh,
think
okay.
this should go away if I do this. Yeah,
Okay.
there we go.
Okay.
So that's just a function of how I have this set to just automatically reload. So
Okay.
everything's good. This works, and then our result is going to actually be that result, and then we can use that and parse that out and do things with that result.
Okay.
So
So you've already got this class called Spells API.
mhm.
Is that already parsing out that, or is
That
there a way to
doesn't
like
do.
map that?
So all this is just class definitions. It's just here
Mhm.
are the properties of all these different things in the tree structure of how it was defined in the API. We're
Okay.
going to tell it to parse and how to handle this data. That way you
Okay.
can do exception handling, things like that. Or if you want to do like conditional parsing and say, is this of type 3, then parse it as a spell. If it's type 4, then parse it as a item, things like that.
Okay.
Um, so let's do that. The way to do that is to look at the content of your result. So we have our result, and then you can actually just go into that and do a var parsed object or whatever you want to call the actual parse thing that you're going to get out. And that's just going to be your spell eventually. And then you're going
Okay.
to do on that result, do a content. And then the content is going to be the serialized version of whatever it is. And usually
Okay.
it's a stream of that because you can send back more than just JSON in a web request. You can send back binary data or images or
Hmm.
whatever. So you have to tell it how to do that.
Okay.
But yeah, I think you're looking in the right
So
place.
so read as stream.
I would say read from JSON because we're getting
Oh,
a
read from
JSON
JSON.
result
Okay.
from there. And we want to
Okay.
use the generic version. And that's just going to allow us to give it a type and say, read as JSON as this type. And it will just automatically match the type.
Okay.
And then you
So
can just,
then this would be our spells or
uh,
spells API.
the D&D spell object. I should have called that something different, but that's what it's called.
Oh, okay. I
Um,
gotcha. All right.
and there we go. Um, and now this is another async call. So you're going to get that same,
Okay. So we need to wait for that to happen.
yep. And then you
All
also need
right.
to pass in what you're parsing. Or actually, you're already doing that. You need to actually have the quote, parentheses, sorry, to finish the function.
Oh, I see. Okay. So over here.
Yep.
Nice.
And there you go.
Okay.
And now we have our
And
parsed
then,
object.
so now do we return that parsed object?
You could, but we want to return our custom spell, right? And so now that we have the parsed object, we know the types and all the data that's in there. Well, we can
Okay.
select data from inside of that and return that instead.
Okay.
So
So
I think,
instead of returning our name, then we'll have our parsed object dot. Oh yeah, look at all this stuff.
yeah. And so
We
there
got
should
our
be a
name
name in
from here.
there.
Parsed object may be null. Okay. So if I go
Yeah,
send this in Postman, yeah, I get back a null name afterward. So does that mean it didn't parse correctly?
you get back a null name.
So it looks like we got a warning when I tried to call that. Oh no, it's just HTTPS. Yeah, when I call this in Postman, now I hit localhost /spell/fireball/4. The result that I get back, it's giving me the level 4, but the parsed out name that I'm getting here, it's giving me back a null in my output.
Huh.
So it's giving me
Yeah, I'm seeing that as
this
well.
as my output.
Um, all right. How much time do we have? I think you wanted to do your Postman stuff, so I don't want to take too much time.
We
I'm gonna
got
try like
we got about 20 minutes or so. And I'm happy to just sort of demo like how we'd write a Postman test on this. That'll only take a few minutes.
okay. Sorry.
No, no worries. So is it something in our spells API? Well, actually, no, because you said this is just a map of
Yeah, it should just be parsing
what we're getting,
things.
right?
So what we can
Okay.
do is, I think,
Is there a good debugger that we can sort of step through and see what's happening, or take a look at parsed object? Like, how would I look at parsed object in VS Code before I actually run this? Is there a way to do that with a debugger, or is that something where you would need like the full Visual Studio to do?
you can run a debugger from here. Um, okay, there it is.
Or can we just like console right line the parsed object?
Yeah, so we could do that too. What I did is on in Visual Studio Code, there's a debug option, and there's an automatic way to generate a launch config for that. And then I actually
Okay.
added a breakpoint already, so we can just launch the debugger, and I think you can even see what's happening there.
So run with or start debugging.
Sure.
Did it actually run?
I don't know. I've never tried debugging in this live share, so we're learning a little bit more. But
Oh, just thinking about it. Can't edit a read-only terminal.
yeah, so I created a new terminal when I ran that.
Oh, okay.
We should have this if we call our API again. Now we should hit our breakpoint, and you can see that. So you should be able to inspect that object now and be able to actually see what's inside of there.
So we got our call stack. Oh.
So
if
what
we
we want to do,
watch,
sorry, we want to just kind of quickly step over this. This is at that line, so it hasn't executed yet.
right?
So we're going to parse it.
Okay.
And now we have a parsed object that should have a whole bunch of things, and it's all null.
Okay. So
Okay.
did we not get data back? So let's go set a watch on result.
Oh, yeah, we
Oh,
did.
we got a
We're getting-
404.
Yeah.
All right.
This is
Well, that
what
makes
happens
sense.
when we do quick demos and don't test any of the error cases. Good to know. Okay.
So, oh, you know what I think is it that I called it from a secure endpoint? Because I think what I was seeing before is that it was a not secure endpoint. www.dnd5eapi.co/API/spells/fireball.
Yep. So that all looks correct.
But we got a 404 back, and so we successfully parsed nothing.
Perfect. That's not what we want. Does this have a non-secure endpoint? I'm wondering if our
Yeah,
live
we
share
could try that.
is preventing HTTPS from behaving well.
Okay. Let's see. Is there a restart?
Sorry. Let's just run this again, and this way we'll actually be able to see.
Okay.
I also have this demo sort of working so on my side, so we could jump over there if you want to talk about more of the Postman stuff and how we can do testing and things like that.
Yeah, we still got a 404 there. Okay, let's share
Weird.
Sam's screen. We'll see what we got going on over
All
here.
right, let's stop that and jump over here. So this is. It looks similar. We've done a little bit of extra bits because I'm actually parsing out dice and using dice and returning that instead of returning like 66. We actually return 6 dice with X dimension. So that's what's going on there. Yeah. And then we can just run this. So this project, what I've done here, this is all open source. So I put this out on GitHub and people can go and find that. Let's go and actually do this. And oops, not that.
I'm gonna drop the link to Sam's repo in chat for everyone. Someone's asking, do we work at Postman? So I work at Postman. Sam is our guest from Microsoft today.
Yeah. Hello. So yeah, I'm just going to import this into Postman as an API, and we can just go from there. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Perfect.
Yeah, let's do it.
So yeah, this is what I use Postman for, is grabbing my APIs, and then I want to send requests or demo them to a product manager, and Postman looks a lot cooler to like my product managers than it does to a like a CLI or something like that. 'Cause that's just a little bit much. You're like sending curls and things. So yeah, but
cool.
Now we have.
So if you've got that running in the background and maybe take the breakpoint off of there, let's go over to collections and we'll actually go call this. So older versions of Postman, when you built out an API, it would automatically make a collection for you. I think in V10, if you're on V10, I think it will not make a collection for you. So you might have to do that one manually. But yeah,
so I just imported this. Like I took the spec that we were generating from our thing and just imported it as an API into Postman. Is that what we want to do, or do we want to use a collection?
So we can do that, but this is basically just helping you with documentation and so on. Let's click on collections here. So notice it didn't make a collection for you. So yeah, so we can just call this spells or something. Yep, or Spell Slayer 3000 I think was the name we had. But yeah, so we'll just add a request on here, and yeah, let's we'll just call this like get spell as the name, and then we'll call our local host endpoint here.
So we have this, and then this is at. Mine was at
5255, right, for the port.
So I'm using my finished project, so it might be different
okay.
from what I shared with you. This one actually has like the full thing.
Okay. Do you need to give it a spell name to actually call?
Yes.
It looks like we
yes,
got a 404. So, all right.
And I need to give it a level. So let's say Fireball at level 6. There we go.
Cool.
So this gives us back the actual working version that actually goes out and calls this. This is in the repo, so it does work, I swear.
Yep. Well, let's go. So right under the address bar in here, we're going to click on tests, and this is where we're going to start writing some Postman tests. And so anything that you put in pre-request script, it's going to go run that JavaScript before it calls the URL of your GET request. And then anything in the test pane here is going to get executed afterwards. So if you do need to do any kind of setup, if you need to go fetch something ahead of time before you call this endpoint, you can do that as a pre-request script. And then anything you want to execute after the response comes back we can use tests from here. So let's do this. Let's pull down that bottom pane a little bit just to give us a little more room. And you'll notice that there's snippets over on the right edge of this pane. And if you scroll down in here, we want to find one that says status code is 200. So we'll start with that. So as long as we get a 200, we want to run this. And so the PM object here is just our Postman object, and it's got a chai.js built into it so that we can use our test expectations and so on. And the PM.test is basically just a string. You know, you can set it to whatever, and then you're passing in a dynamic function or a lambda. You know, you're basically writing out this code kind of in line. Line 2 is basically saying from the Postman object, I want my response to have a status of 200. So if any point of the test fails, it'll stop the execution at that point. So after line 2, anything that we write will only execute as long as we get a 200 status back from our request. So in between line 2 and 3, let's hit enter a couple times and we'll write it in some code here. So what we can do now is we can actually parse out this data. So the data that Sam got back is this big JSON response. And what we want to do is we want to grab the damage dice here, and we're just going to calculate like what our damage could be. So on line 3, let's unpack all of this data because right now it's in this JSON sort of blob. So let's just say let data equal. Let data equals, and then we'll do pm.response.json, and JSON is a function. And this is going to unpack that now. So if we were to console.log our data variable, then inside the Postman console, we would actually see the whole unpacked object of all of these different parameters and so on. So go ahead and if you're on a Mac, or actually you're on Windows, so hit Control Enter, and that'll go ahead and send that over. And then if you open up the console down the bottom left panel, the bottom, yeah.
Okay.
So there's our effectively our JavaScript console, and you can see it's expanded out. We see the name and the description and the damage and so on. So we know that it called the URL and it successfully parsed everything as well. So we can also see the test results 1 of 1, and if you can discern the color green, we see that's in green. That meant that our test has passed so far. So let's go back to our tests panel. In here, you can close down the console for now. There's a little X over on the right side if you want. You can just close that out. So we'll go back to tests, and what we want to do now is we want to parse out that damage data and actually do some calculation here. So if in the, in the pane underneath that, let's go back to body. Okay, so we have data.damage is basically going to be that subhash from here. And what we want to do is we want to grab like the number of dice and the dice count for now. So we'll just say like, you can use var or let. There's different implications to how we would do those. Let is a little more localized. So yeah, so we can do data.damage.dice count. And then the dice size will be data.damage. Yep. And there's lots of fun auto completion in here as well. Now the dice count is going to be pretty static, but the dice size, this is where we're going to sort of randomize each of the dice. So what we want to do now is for each of the dice count, we want to randomly calculate the size, and we want to sum all that together. So let's make a variable called sum. By the way, not all math jokes are funny, just sum. So we're going to say let sum equal 0, and then we're going to do like a for loop for the dice count. So
that doesn't.
It'll be very similar to C++. So for open parentheses, and we can say let I equal 0, and then I less than dice count I plus plus.
I less than dice count. Oops. All right.
And then
this is JavaScript, not TypeScript, right?
This is JavaScript, yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Cool. So what we can do inside this for loop is we can basically we can call capital M on math.random, and random is lowercase, but random is a function. Now, random is going to give you a number between 0 and 1, and so we need to multiply that by our dice size. And then that should give us a random number between effectively 0 and 5, so we're also going to have to round that up. So there's actually a ceiling that you can call, or we can just add +1 to it, yeah, and that should be fine.
Yeah, I suppose ceiling would work too. Yeah. Cool. All right.
Cool. And then, so that's going to give us, so let's add this to our sum. So we'll say sum plus equals at the beginning of that line. And then we can console log after the for loop. We can just console log sum. Or actually, let's do this. So instead of just sum, we're going to do a backtick. This is how we do string interpolation in JavaScript. And then the variable will be exactly the same as C# with the $ and the curly braces. So we'll say, you cast fireball for damage, or like some damage or something like that.
Okay.
So in this case, we could also grab our data.name and pull that in as part of this. So where you wrote out the word fireball, we can change that to be a $ curly bracket, and we can call data.name, because that's part of our data structure that came back. And then let's add the word damage on the end of our string, and then let's run this. Is that going to work out okay? So math.random times our dice size. It'll give us a value between 0 and 5. We're going to have to add a +1 on that because our dice can't have a 0 value. Actually, we're doing a ceiling on it.
We could still get zeros inclusive though, right? So we could still get zeros. Let's do this.
Yeah. Cool. So let's send that over. And hey, you cast fireball for 44 damage. Now, one thing you could do is you could do a console log inside the for loop just so we can see what each of the dice actually were, if we wanted something like that. That way we could actually see, like, were any of the dice actually a 0. This is effectively how we do our debugging is just print statement debugging. But yeah, so we were able to actually call out our third-party API, get our data back, and then use Postman then to say, hey, as part of our test code here, we can actually parse into that data and go do the dice roll ourselves. So we're fetching that data from a third-party API through the API that Sam made, that I tried to make, and then we're actually grabbing that many dice, and we're actually rolling the dice, and we're getting our damage outputs.
Yeah. Okay. Neat.
So,
how does this? So this is going to run every single time that I run this function now. Every time that I run this request, this is going to run every single time. So,
yeah, and the nice thing about this, so if you want to use Postman in like a CI/CD pipeline or something like that, you can have all of these tests for each of your calls. So each request that you add over in that left panel, you can have test code for each of those. And if any of those fail, you can actually halt your CI/CD. So even though your code might be working and your unit testing in your code might be working, when you actually run it in Postman and it runs all this other test code, it's like, well, the unit test passed, but as an integration, and effectively behavior-driven development or behavior-driven testing here, Chai will actually let you set up these assertions and expectations around, I expect this damage to be, between 0 and whatever 8d6 is, so 48. So it should be between 1 and 48. And if it's not, you can throw an error, or you can just set an expectation. Say, I expect it to be greater than 1, or greater than or equal to 1. I expect it to be less than or equal to 48. And if it's not, that test will fail, and then you can't deploy. And so it's just an extra level of sort of confidence that your API is working as you expect. So now that you've got these tests in here, you can do all kinds of interesting stuff. We've got command line tools like Newman, which is our community-driven product. We have Postman CLI, which is a CLI version of the Postman test runner, which can get into like governance and API security checks and things like that. And that tool is built just by the Postman team, and it's more closed source. So yeah, so that's basically our API. So congratulations, we have rolled for initiative and we have successfully blasted our room with 44 damage. Let's run it again. Let's just make sure that this is actually coming in nice and
So
randomly for us.
if I understand this, I should be able to do this. And then is there a way to assert inside of these? Can I assert these
Yep.
tests? And
Yeah, and so what we can do after this is we could actually do like a pm.expect.
okay. Sorry, it was making sure I
Yeah,
knew.
no worries.
Um,
So
PM dot.
pm.expect, and then you can give it a variable. So you can say dice count, and then after the parentheses, say dot to dot b, or you've got like to b to equal to b dot greater than, things like that. Yep. So let's go ahead and send that over,
Okay. We can do
and
something like
then
this, and
mhm.
then now we can actually validate that that's going. And I made this a separate test.
Yep, which is totally fine.
So
Yep.
dice. So now we should have two things like this.
Yep. So
Right?
one of them failed. So one of our tests failed. So now we can go look at the test results and we can see which one failed. Now, unfortunately, in our so yeah, in Postman, we'll tell you that it failed. Oh, pm.expect to be is not a function. Oh, sorry, to be equal or to equal. So just type eq instead of .b.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect.
There you go. So yeah, so Chai.js, there's a lot of these built-in expectations and assertions and so on that you can build in, that you can go very deeply nested. Like I expect this to be an object with these properties. I expect it to have a property name of this or that, or I expect this to be a list of at least 3 things. Like there's lots of really cool assertions that you can do with Chai. And like I said, now that you've got these tests written, you can do all kinds of really interesting things with CI/CD pipelines and test runners and all kind of stuff. I mean, the CI/CD is basically calling the test runner, where you can say, go run all of my tests from my collection, and if any of them fail, then what do I do? And you can just watch the output of your tests, and then you can tell your CI/CD if this doesn't complete successfully, then stop the production deploy, and then you can go take a look at why. So there's
Cool.
all kinds of neat reporting and stuff like that. I'm going to be doing a blog post and a video on how to actually take these reports now from the test runner and do something interesting with that. So I'll have that out pretty soon. But we're out of time. We actually went a little over time, so I appreciate everyone's patience on that. We did lose a little bit of time with the setup at the beginning and so on. So thank you, Sam, for hanging out with us today. We like to end our live stream with community shout outs. So Sam, what do you have going on? Is there anything that you want to sort of share with everyone? Any kind of like community work, anything like that you do?
Yeah. So my job is mostly regional work inside of the Bay Area, and so we actually run a reactor space. That's sort of where we do our advocacy most of the time. And so those are community spaces. There's places that other companies can go, or other meetup groups or user groups can use as public spaces to kind of come and have meetups with nice AV and audio and cool people, hopefully. So that's usually what we're doing. If you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, we have one in San Francisco. That's where I work. So I'd love to see you there. If not, we have a few others around the world. That's not the right browser window. There we go. Pulled up too many things. But we have a whole bunch of different places where if you're in the tech community and you're interested in kind of going to some in-person events, we've been trying to do more of those. Not just Microsoft stuff. These spaces are intentionally for like community events. So I think we've worked with Postman in the past to kind of host events in San Francisco. And we've worked with a number of other places as well around the world to kind of do that too. We also do lots of live streams on our YouTube at the Microsoft Reactor YouTube. So you can catch a lot of my content there, as well as my peers. And we talk about all sorts of things Microsoft related, whether that's
Awesome.
AI, which has been really hot now, or
Hmm.
.NET, which is sort of what I like to do, or Azure and career fundamentals and how to like polish your resume and get that and interview
Sweet.
for tech jobs, things like that. So
Awesome. Cool. That sounds awesome. Thanks for sharing that with us, Sam. And speaking of AI, next week's live stream, I'm going to be doing some really cool stuff with like blinky lights and so on in the background. But next week, we're actually going to be we're going to tie together a whole bunch of APIs, and we're going to do some IoT fun. And basically, we're going to be asking ChatGPT a question, and we're going to do some sentiment analysis on the response. We're going to call another API to do sentiment analysis. And then based on that response, we're going to make some lights happen. So it'll be like, red, green if it's like, negative or positive, or, some other color scheme based on the sentiment analysis that we have coming back. So we're going to have a handful of guests on the stream next week. I think Jan from Germany is going to join us, and Sawat from BC, who's part of our flows team. We're going to show you how to use flows inside of Postman to like tie all these APIs together and actually visually see like as these things are calling and so on within Postman. It should be a lot of fun. So come check that out next week. Also want to give a shout out to our community forum as well. So if you go check out postman.com and go check out our community forum, there are a lot of really helpful folks. So if you want to go dive deeper on the types of testing that I was walking Sam through, you've got a lot of community members there. Our developer advocacy team, like myself, we also post in there as well to help people out. We also post about events that we have coming up. So whether it's an intergalactic free webinar that we have, or live streams coming out, or even just events that we're going to be at and be a part of, we post all of those things in our community forum. And so we'll go from there. I know we went way over time. Appreciate everybody's patience. But thank you, Sam. Thanks again. It was great kind of working with you on this and nerding out a little bit. I'm looking forward to checking out that reactor space next time I'm in the Bay Area. I'll be up in March, I believe. I don't know if I'll get by the space in March, but I'm sure I'll have multiple trips up there in the near future, so I'll drop by and say hello.
Awesome. That'd be great. We did talk a little bit about CI, so I'm going to just call out that I'm going to try to get the CI bits into that repo that we shared.
Oh, cool.
So that you'll actually get Postman doing the test as your CI as like a check-in validation, just to show that, because that's something I love. So
yeah, that'd be great. So all the links that we shared today for the documentation, the blog posts, and Reactor, Sam, if you can send me the link for the Reactor, we'll put all those in the YouTube description afterwards. And so thanks again, everyone. Thanks for coming by today, and we'll see you next week on the live stream. And have a great rest of your week, Sam, and we'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.